Okay, in Chapter 5, we're going to talk about three things: cost, volume, and profit, and the interrelationship between all three. And we also have we're leaning on a topic that we've talked about, I think, before, about contribution margin. So contribution margin is going to be a big part of this chapter, and it's something that's very important that you get hold of. So contribution margin is your sales minus your variable costs is your contribution margin. So contribution margin essentially makes available dollars to cover your fixed costs. So contribution margin is very important. We can do contribution margin by department, we can do it by job, and so on, which is a very important way for a manager to look at the contributions of different departments, products, divisions, etc. So let's look at this in one example here. This is the Racing Bicycle Company. Its contribution margin statement says 500 bicycles were sold. Variable expenses were 150. Bicycles brought in 250. So there's a contribution margin of 100. Now that $100,000 is available to cover the fixed expenses, in this case 80, which leaves us a net operating income of 20. But you can see the advantage immediately of contribution margin is I know what the bicycles cost me. That's all in the variable cost. And everything I make over that goes towards covering my fixed costs. So contribution margin is used to first cover fixed costs, and then anything after that is simply remains for operating expenses. Now, what could we do with this contribution margin equivalent? Well, instead of it being a big number like 80,000, 100,000, so on, we can turn it into unit contribution margin, and then we can use it to figure out how many units we need to sell of something to cover our variable expenses, our fixed expenses, or even break even. So let's look at that here. The contribution approach: sales, variable expenses, and contribution margin are expressed on a per unit basis. If Racing sells an additional bicycle, $200 additional contribution margin will be generated to cover fixed expenses and profit. So how did we get that? Well, we took the bicycle sales, 500 bicycles, at $250,000, which means they're sold at $500 per unit. The variable expenses were $150,000, and on a per unit basis, 500 units being the variable here, 150,000 divided by 500 bicycles is $300 per unit. So the per unit costs are sales of 500 minus 300 is a total contribution margin of $200 per bicycle. So each bicycle throws $200 towards fixed costs. So now that we have our contribution margin, we can look at an example of how much we have to use, or how much we have to sell to break even. So we know our fixed expenses, that's shown here, is $80,000, and we need to figure out how many bicycles we need to break even. And so we can see that if we sell 400 bicycles, $200, 80,000 divided by $200 would be 400 bicycles. And then, of course, we just put that into the spreadsheet. We can see 400 bicycles times the cost of $500 a bike is $200,000 in sales at $500 a unit. And then the variable expenses are $120,000, and the contribution is $80,000, and the fixed expenses, we would break even. So you can see the advantage of contribution margin. If I know it on a per unit basis, I know that, for example, if I sell another bike, it's $200 to cover my fixed expenses, and I have to get over, I have a bogey or a hurdle rate of 400 bikes per, I assume this would be a month, so 400 bikes a month. So if you have 400 bikes a month, you got to get over. Everyone after that hits net income. So if you were an owner, you would be thinking to yourself, okay, I got to sell 400 bikes. Everything after that is gravy, but I got to sell 400 bikes every month to cover my expenses. So that's a very important part of the overall management. The 401st bike, as you can see here, adds $200 to net operating income, and of course every bike after that would add to net operating income. In addition to that, you don't even really need to look at net operating income as far as a statement. You realize you can immediately calculate, if you know your contribution margin per unit, that if I sold, say, 4,100 bikes, I have 4,000 covers fixed, and every 200 bikes is net income. So 200 times 100 bikes it's like, oh wow, I understand how much money I have going forward. So in this example, is Racing sells 430 bikes, the net income would be 6,000. If it sold 500 bikes, which it did before, it would be 20,000. So the idea of having contribution margin per unit, you can see that this is managerial accounting. We're being managers. We want to know this number so we can manage. It's not about reporting numbers to the IRS or financial accounting. This is why managerial accounting is inside the company. We can manage with a number like that. I know exactly what I've got to do. And it's not just so much racing bicycles. I mean, a bar owner can determine how many beers he has to sell. A pizza place can know how many pizzas they have to sell. A donut place can know. I don't know why I'm on food. I must be hungry. Okay, so, or dry cleaners knows how many units they have to sell before they break even. And so once you know that, you can kind of adjust going forward of like, I've got to push harder. How am I doing this month? You would know very quickly how close you are to break even every month on a regular basis if you knew your contribution margin. So that's why it's so important. Let's keep going on this in the next unit.